This is Time and Other Thieves, reflections on another month of living and learning. I'm Sarah B., and I have a recurring dream. I'm pretty sure I've talked about it on here before. It's the one where I'm trying to get somewhere or accomplish something, like changing my clothes, for instance, or walking to my car that's parked on the other side of a college campus, and it's just not happening. Either I don't have what I need, or I don't know which way to go, or I just fucking can't make the desired thing happen. And God help me if I need to pee at some point in the dream, because that will add another objective I cannot meet, finding a bathroom. And if/when I do find a bathroom, it is beyond filthy, with every shitty toilet overflowing. By the end of such dreams, I'm always running very late, and I'm incredibly upset about it, like crying and screaming and pulling at my hair upset. That's usually when I wake up, and I'm always grateful for it. In these dreams, I have never once gotten to where I need to be or accomplished what I needed to accomplish. In the wake of my most recent dream in this vein, in which I was trying to procure a Caesar salad and a piece of pizza for my husband in a shopping mall, which of course proved impossible, it occurred to me that they might pop up the most when I'm feeling overwhelmed, which is how I've been feeling lately, but not really in a bad way. I'm not feeling overwhelmed by things I have to do, but by things I want to do. There are so many things, so many projects, so many books to read, so many books to write. Here's what I've got on my plate at the moment. I'm taking the fourth and final class of the copy editing certificate program I'm doing through UC San Diego Extension. That'll be done in April. I'm ghostwriting a memoir for a dear friend. We're almost done with our weekly 1-hour interviews, and then I will start writing in earnest. I'm transcribing my grandparents' courtship love letters and would like to write a book about them and me and whatever epiphanies and wonderings they inspire. I'm still transcribing my grandmother's girlhood diaries. I'm reading books about psychoanalytic group therapy in preparation for maybe starting my own group. I'm seeing individual therapy clients, averaging 10 sessions a week. I'm doing a lay minister training at my Buddhist Sangha. I'm trying to get a freelance editing business off the ground. I'm trying to write a novel of sorts, based on the 50,000 plus words I produced for National Novel Writing Month back in November. And I write and produce monthly episodes of this podcast. Meanwhile, I'm just doing regular life. Walking the dogs every morning, doing yoga, meditating, recently started doing the stationary bike. I'm reading for pleasure, spending time with my husband, writing letters to various pen pals, walking around the yard, cooking dinner most every night, watching TV, sleeping. And so when it comes to my many projects, all of which have finish lines, destinations, goals, I feel like I'm moving at a snail's pace. If I could just pick one and focus on it, I could really make something happen in short order. But I can't seem to do that these days. The longer I live, the more I'm interested in, and the more aware I am of life passing quickly, and the more I therefore want to pursue all the interests. I saw a Georgia O'Keeffe quote recently that said, "I think it's foolish for people to want to be happy. Happy is so momentary. You're happy for an instant, and then you start thinking again. Interest is the most important thing in life. Happiness is temporary, but interest is continuous." In many ways, I feel lucky for knowing this much, at least implicitly, at the tender age of 30, which is when I decided to quit teaching English at the community college because it didn't feel meaningful and I didn't have the temperament for performing for multiple groups of 20 plus people every week, and to pursue all my interests. Now, almost 12 years later, I'm still doing that. Of course, the interests have changed. I've gone through many phases. It seems the more of them I have pursued, the more they've changed. One bleeds into the next, and I never really get anywhere with any of them, much like in my recurrent dream, and that is where I can start to feel not so lucky. But honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. What does it even mean to get somewhere anyway? Does it mean being a well-known name in some field or other? having lots of social media followers, having your words published somewhere, being interviewed by Terry Gross and Krista Tippett. I mean, all of that sounds cool, especially the last one, but I know what would probably happen. The thrill and shine of all those achievements would soon fade, and I'd want more, bigger, better ones. You can never get enough of what you don't really need. And what I really need is to be interested in something. I need projects to work on, not so I can finish them or achieve some goal, but so I will have work to do and something always to be learning. My many interests and pursuits feel like a manifestation of life itself, pushing me forward from inside, which is to say, I guess, that they enliven me. These letters my grandparents wrote to each other, which I talked about last month, enliven me in a way that's almost painful. Much like diaries, such letters are time machines. Reading them, I feel in my bones and in my heart that my grandfather is still 22 years old, lying belly down on the bed, writing a letter to his fiancée in nothing but his underwear, his back bright red from having worked shirtless in the Tennessee sun all day, building a house for his mom and dad. And my grandmother is still lounging in a hammock, with the breeze from Lake Huron nudging hair across her eyes as she writes a letter to her fiancé. They wrote each other every day that summer, while she was vacationing with her parents in Oliphant, Ontario. They talked about what they did that day, and then about their relationship, and about sex. In watching them converse, I converse with them. Their words deserve my attention, and I am humbled to give it, if only by reading them and typing some of them up. But I want to do more than that. Always more and more. At times it can feel a little manic, and if I actually had bipolar disorder, I'm sure my projects would become problematic. But I do not have bipolar disorder and can therefore manage the manic feeling with repeated reminders to self that there's only so much time in the day, that my projects aren't going anywhere, and that even if I never finish some of them, most of them, the time and energy given to them is never wasted. And I'm also here to tell you, while there is only so much time in the day, there is a lot of time in the day, if you can stay focused and true to yourself. At the suggestion of a loyal listener named Andrew, I recently started reading, in random spurts of course, a book-length collection of interviews called Faith, Hope, and Carnage. Sean O'Hagan is the interviewer, and the musician Nick Cave is the interviewee. My friend Andrew informed me, after listening to last month's Time and Other Thieves, that some of what I talked about in that episode sounded similar to what Nick Cave talks about in these interviews, or conversations. He also sent along a link to an episode of On Being, in which Krista Tippett interviews Cave about the book, making it an interview about some interviews. And in the first interview with O'Hagan, Cave says that interviews in general suck. They eat you up. I hate them. After a while, you just get worn away by your own story. But obviously he trusted O'Hagan enough to do a series of interviews that took place sporadically, totaling over 40 hours of conversation between August of 2020 and the following summer. I'm glad he did, and I'm glad Andrew told me about the book. He was right about my last episode touching on some of the same concepts in regards to religion as a word, implying more work than spirituality as a word does. Cave puts it brilliantly when he says that religion is spirituality with rigor. And just a day after writing the first part of this episode's script, I read another section of the book in which my own thoughts and feelings are echoed in Cave's words, or if not echoed, elaborated upon. In the second chapter, titled The Utility of Belief, Cave asks, "Who says creativity is the be-all and end-all? Who says that our accomplishments are the only true measure of what is important in our lives? Perhaps there are other lives worth living, other ways of being in the world." And that line, Ways of Being, is the title of another book I've been reading that I can highly recommend. It's by James Bridle, and its full title is Ways of Being, Animals, Plants, Machines, The Search for a Planetary Intelligence. Yes, it contains 2 colons. Krista Tippett interviewed him too, the lucky bastard, back in March. Cave goes on to say that we may ultimately find that, to our surprise, our creative endeavors are not the defining element of our lives. They are perhaps a means to an end. Which is different from what I was just trying to say, but somehow similar. I was saying that creative activity is an end in itself, a way for life itself to manifest through us, even more than it already is. But Cave is saying they're a means to an end. When O'Hagan asks, "Have you considered what that end might be?" Cave responds in the best possible way. He says, "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Yes, and he may never figure it out, right? And that might be the whole point. He's always in this process of figuring out. And actually, James Bridle touches on this ever-unfolding process when he says, "The closer we examine and the more forcefully we interrogate and attempt to classify the world, the more complex and unclassifiable it becomes." We're always figuring out, or perhaps finding out. And yet, later in that interview, Cave says this, "All my songs are written from a place of spiritual yearning, because that is the place I permanently inhabit. To me, personally, this place feels charged, creative, and full of potential." What I was saying earlier about life itself pushing at me from the inside, spiritual yearning is the perfect way to describe what that feels like. And yes, it feels charged, and so full of potential that it's nearly bursting. I don't think that potential will ever be met, though, which makes me wonder if any of us can ever reach our fullest potential, and which leads me, conveniently enough, to what I want to be the focus of this particular episode. Last month, I said that this month I would talk in more detail about the book On Becoming a Person by Carl Rogers. I have since finished reading that book, making it the first title to go on my Books Read in 2024 list, which is the first such list I've ever kept. I got a column for me on one side of the page and a column for my husband on the other. He currently has 7 titles in his column, and I just have the one. Thanks to my inability to ever read just one book at a time, it takes me a good while to finish anything. But I did finish the Carl Rogers book, the first of his books that I've ever read, and would like to share some of its ideas with you today. On Becoming a Person, subtitled A Therapist's View of Psychotherapy, was published in 1961. Its 400 pages are organized into 7 parts that are each divided into chapters, most, if not all, of which are essays that were either previously published in periodicals and or presented as lectures at conferences and other events. The parts are titled Speaking Personally, How Can I Be of Help?, The Process of Becoming a Person, A Philosophy of Persons, The Place of Research in Psychotherapy, What Are the Implications for Living, and The Behavioral Sciences and the Person. The word person comes up a lot, which makes sense, given that Carl Rogers was the founder of person-centered psychotherapy, originally client-centered, which at the time was even radical because the common term for a person in therapy was patient, not client. Person-centered psychotherapy as a name might sound redundant in a way. Isn't all therapy person-centered? Actually, it isn't. In many cases, still to this day, it's problem-centered. The client has a problem or is a problem, and the therapist is enlisted to fix the problem, making it also therapist-centered therapy. And also, the degree to which psychotherapy is person-centered depends on how you define person. As I mentioned earlier, I myself am a psychotherapist, and in case you didn't listen to last month's episode, I was drawn to read Carl Rogers in this particular time in my life because I've been thinking about starting a psychoanalytic therapy group. Though On Becoming a Person doesn't talk a lot about group work, Rogers did a lot of it in his day, and he applied a lot of the same theories to it that informed his work with individuals. Anyway, that's just a little context. Back to defining the word person. When Carl Rogers is using that word, he's referring to a process, a flow, a fluctuation, a constant becoming. We are always in this process of becoming. It strikes me as a Buddhist concept. I'm reminded of a chant my Sangha does. Always going, going, going on beyond, always becoming Buddha. We never become Buddha. We are always becoming Buddha, by which I mean enlightened, or perhaps just simply able to contact our basic goodness, our basic workability in a world that seems unworkable. A person, in Rogers' conceptualization, is not a fixed collection of personality traits. A person is an open system, capable of complex, unpredictable growth and change. Just like in Buddhist thought, the self is not a discrete entity. It is always changing, like a river, and it is impermanent and unlocatable, not in the body and not in the mind. If you associate Carl Rogers with nothing more than the following, I will be satisfied. He believed wholeheartedly in a person's ability to change, i.e., to become more of themselves, and that the most effective way to create such change is by allowing that person to feel seen and understood and accepted as they are right now, before any desired change has taken place. When I accept myself as I am, then I change. Feeling this acceptance and understanding is a prerequisite for learning. Real learning, the kind that informs your life, not the kind you acquire in order to pass a test, for creativity and for healthy, satisfying relationships. Rogers did not believe in giving advice. If receiving advice worked, nobody would ever feel a need for therapy. The way forward must come from within the person, not from some external source or authority. Lastly, I would want you to remember that Rogers believed the therapist should be real and authentic with clients, as his realness will evoke theirs. When we sense that other people are being themselves, we are more likely to be ourselves. Or as Rogers puts it, I can only try to live by my interpretation of the current meaning of my experience, and try to give others the permission and freedom to develop their own inward freedom and thus their own meaningful interpretation of their own experience. Those are the broad strokes. Now I'll share some details from On Becoming a Person. In the section titled, How Can I Be of Help?, Rogers lays out 10 questions and considerations that guide his behavior in what he hopes will be helping relationships. He defines helping relationships as those wherein, quote, one of the participants intends that there should come about, in one or both parties, more appreciation of, more expression of, more functional use of the latent inner resources of the individual. Obviously, the therapist-client relationship should meet these criteria, but all kinds of other relationships can be helping ones: teacher-student, parent-child, coach-athlete, friends, spouses, siblings, etc. If you want to help promote and profligate helping relationships in your life, here are 10 guiding questions and considerations, courtesy of Carl Rogers. 1. Can I be, in some way, which will be perceived by the other person as trustworthy, as dependable, or consistent in some deep sense? 2. Can I be expressive enough as a person that what I am will be communicated unambiguously? 3. Can I let myself experience positive attitudes toward this other person? Attitudes of warmth, caring, liking, interest, respect? 4. Can I be strong enough as a person to be separate from the other? Can I be a sturdy respecter of my own feelings, my own needs, as well as his? 5. Am I secure enough within myself to permit him his separateness? Can I give him the freedom to be? 6. Can I let myself enter fully into the world of his feelings and personal meanings and see things as he does? 7. Can I accept each facet of this person? Can I receive him as he is? Can I communicate this attitude? 8. Can I act with sufficient sensitivity in the relationship that my behavior will not be perceived as a threat? 9. Can I free him from the threat of external evaluation? And 10. Can I meet this other individual as a person who is in the process of becoming, or will I be bound by his past and my past? Just a quick note on the use of pronouns there. We're talking a lot about this in my copy editing class, about the use of the generic he pronoun. And I just want to say that when Rogers was writing on becoming a person, the singular they was not yet accepted as a valid pronoun for formal writing. These days we'd say, can I free them from the threat of external evaluation? Can I receive them as they are? We'd also maybe avoid words like mankind, because they're not inclusive enough, excluding women and non-binary folks. And mankind is a word that Rogers used, as you'll hear soon. I myself, as a woman, do not take offense at the word mankind or at the generic he. I've always liked it, actually. Found it comforting and perhaps paradoxically inclusive, because I know it's being used in a way that is referencing all people of all genders. But I totally get that not everyone feels that way, and I am now, after some initial resistance years ago, totally cool with the singular they. But I didn't want to change Rogers's wording to reflect our modern language. Now for my commentary on his considerations in regards to helping relationships. I'm going to highlight just a few. The second one asks, can I be expressive enough as a person that what I am will be communicated unambiguously? I love that he says what I am as opposed to who I am. To communicate who I am would imply the kind of identification with a certain concept of self that is actually anathema to helping relationships. It implies a static self, whereas the phrase what I am suggests more feeling. I am mad, I am sad, I am glad, I am scared, I am thinking about XYZ, I am having the fantasy that. And to be expressive enough to unambiguously communicate what I am in real time is a tall order indeed. It's like the Bodhisattva vow. We know it's impossible to fulfill, but we make the vow anyway, again and again. The fifth consideration also stood out to me. Am I secure enough within myself to permit the other person his separateness? Can I give him the freedom to be? Yes, we must be secure in ourselves, must essentially know that we're enough, that we have everything we need within us to be okay, that any other person, place, animal, or object in our life could vanish and we could still be happy or interested in life. When Rogers refers to permitting the other person his separateness, he's acknowledging and accepting that the other person is, ironically, just like him in that way. If he were to vanish, they would essentially be okay, eventually. And yet, both parties still have needs in the context of interpersonal relationships. I'm not sure how to reconcile those two stances. For now, I'm content to chalk it up to one of the many paradoxes that characterize the human condition. The next consideration, number 6, seems to almost contradict number 5. Can I let myself enter fully into the world of his feelings and personal meanings and see things as he does? This almost seems to erase the aforementioned separateness, entering fully into someone else's world. But in order to do this in a way that isn't codependent or psychologically invasive, we must be firmly seated in our own separateness. We must know what we are in order to avoid merging with the other in a way that wouldn't be helpful, but icky and confusing. It's the difference between compassion and empathy, I think. We see things as the other person sees them, and we make sense of their meaning-making, but we still do it from our own perspective so that we can report back to the other person what we've learned about them. It does them no good if we just take on their thoughts and feelings and personal meanings and make them our own. How is that relationally helpful? I don't want you to feel my feelings. They're mine, not yours. And what good will it do if we're both feeling them? But to get the unassailable sense that the other person is able to see from our perspective and understands what we're feeling, That does a lot of good indeed. The last of the considerations I want to highlight is number 9. Can I free the other person from the threat of external evaluation? Reward and punishment, good and bad. Curiously enough, Rogers says, a positive evaluation is as threatening in the long run as a negative one, since to inform someone that he is good implies that you also have the right to tell him he is bad. I saw an ad or something recently for a coffee cup that had these words on it. Something like, "You're an awesome wife. Keep that shit up." The first part seems benign enough, but the second part elicited a scoff from me. And that second part, I realized, is usually implied by the first part. When we're told we're doing a great job at something, it's hard not to conclude that we should keep doing a great job, lest we receive opposing feedback. But people need encouragement, don't they? I've had many clients over the years who apparently desire evaluative statements from me. They'll even say, "That thing I did was good, right?" Or, "So that's an improvement, right?" And as a therapist, it's hard to resist the urge to say, "Good job," or "Well done," when a client tells me of an instance in which they didn't resort to default maladaptive behaviors. But Rogers asserts that, quote, "The more I can keep a relationship free of judgment and evaluation, the more this will permit the other person to reach the point where he recognizes that the locus of evaluation, the center of responsibility, lies within himself. The meaning and value of his experience is, in the last analysis, something which is up to him, and no amount of external judgment can alter this." End quote. So maybe the best way to respond when tempted to make evaluative statements is to simply ask the person how they feel about a given accomplishment and to reflect that feeling back to them. To agree with someone that they are improving means that there is some fixed goal they're working toward, some version of themselves that is better than the current version. But there's the rub, the very root of all their problems, thinking they need to be better than what they are right now, because that implies that what they are right now is a static thing. And when we think that something is solid and fixed, then it becomes that way. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But Rogers contends that we are all streams of becoming, not finished products. A person is a fluid process, a flowing river of change, a continually changing constellation of potentialities, not a fixed quantity of traits. To really engage in this process, he says, or to go with the flow, if you will, one must have an increasing openness to experience, which he defines as the polar opposite of defensiveness. Instead of one's experience, quote, being translated or twisted to fit a preconceived self-structure, the self and personality emerge from experience. One is a participant and an observer rather than being in control. And where there's a need to be in control, you can bet there will be defensiveness. I also love what Rogers says about learning, specifically in the realm of formal education. And I had not known, prior to reading On Becoming a Person and going down a YouTube rabbit hole of interviews and the like, that he wrote a book about education called Freedom to Learn, which I would, of course, love to read. Based on the few essays he dedicates to the subject in On Becoming a Person, I gathered that Rogers had a very similar, if not identical, theory of learning that A.S. Neill had. You might recall from the second ever episode of Time and Other Thieves that A.S. Neill was the founder and head administrator of a school in England called Summerhill, and he wrote a book with the same title, first published in 1960, and it is one of my favorite books. Neill believed that children and teens shouldn't be forced to learn anything. They need to be able to follow certain rules that result in treating others with respect, not infringing on their freedom, but other than that, they shouldn't have to go to class if they don't want to. And some of the students at Summerhill, a boarding school, never did, but they were the exception. Most students eventually wound up going to class. Without being pressured to learn stuff they weren't interested in, There's that word again, interest. They were better able to access within themselves what they were interested in. And knowing they were in an environment that would support them in pursuing those interests, they did. Similar to Rogers, Neil believed that people, children in particular, desire more than anything else to feel approved of. Rogers would call it unconditional positive regard. In the Summerhill book, Neil goes so far to show his approval of a student whom he's caught shoplifting that he goes shoplifting with him. But he wasn't really shoplifting, as he arranged it with the shop owner ahead of time and knew the lifted items would eventually be returned after the student had learned his lesson. The lesson being that he did not need to shoplift or otherwise rebel against authority because he was his own authority. And he learned that lesson without ever being punished in the traditional sense or without being taught in the traditional sense. In On Becoming a Person, Rogers' description of the type of learning that takes place in therapy reminds me of Neil's ideas on learning in general. He says, it is a type of learning which cannot be taught. The essence of it is the aspect of self-discovery. In a later essay that focuses more on learning in the classroom setting, Rogers again evokes A.S. Neil for me and Neil's ideas about children needing approval, though not in an evaluative sense, more like, I accept you just as you are, every part of you. He writes, the teacher who can warmly accept, who can provide an unconditional positive regard, and who can empathize with the feelings of fear, anticipation, and discouragement which are involved in meeting new material, will have done a great deal towards setting the conditions for learning. It will perhaps disturb some that when the teacher holds such attitudes, when he is willing to be acceptant of feelings, it is not only attitudes towards schoolwork itself which are expressed, but feelings about parents, feelings of hatred for brother or sister, feelings of concern about self, the whole gamut of attitudes. Do such feelings have a right to exist openly in school settings? It is my thesis that they do. They are related to the person's becoming, to his effective learning and effective functioning, and to deal understandingly and acceptantly with such feelings has a definite relationship to the learning of long division or the geography of Pakistan. End quote. Student-centered learning is what he called it. He practiced it himself with college students, letting them decide how each class would unfold and what they wanted to read for homework and if they wanted him to lecture on something. He admitted it wasn't always the most efficient method of teaching. There was lots of aimless talk and what felt like the wasting of time. But yet, as I watched the process, he said, and here's where little fireworks started going off in my head, the idea persisted that perhaps this waste of time may be necessary. It may very well be that that is the way man learns best. Does that statement set little fireworks off in your brain? For me, it was like my whole being sat upright and said, of course. I don't know that I can add anything to it or put it in any other way or even provide concrete examples, but the idea that man learns best by wasting time along the way resonates in my cells. I do think that some forms of wasting time are better than others. For instance, I don't think that scrolling through social media is ever a good way to waste one's time, whereas simply staring off into space can most definitely be. I think the kind of time wastage Rogers is referring to is rather a product, if you will, of being open to one's experience, of letting one's interest or natural proclivities, even shyness or social awkwardness, which may have been a factor in the aimless talk that Rogers observed in his student-centered classroom, lead them from one moment to the next. Sometimes it will entice one down side roads that don't really lead anywhere, but in order to find one's true path, some diversions must be taken. So that time isn't really wasted. When one follows the natural inclinations of the moment, he is becoming involved with his whole self, his very person, his root drives, emotions, attitudes, and values. Rogers says there's no better way a person can learn. Quote, "What better method is there to engross the individual, to bring him, his ideas, his feelings into communication with others, to break down the barriers that create isolation in a world where for his own mental safety and health, man has to learn to be part of mankind." And that's really what we should be teaching in schools, right? If we insist on having schools. I can think of no more important curriculum than one whose aim is to teach young people how to be part of mankind. In other words, how to be in relationship with people, how to express one's thoughts and feelings effectively and respectfully. As I've said before, just read some social media comments to some news outlet post if you want to see just how badly we need such skills. We are awful toward one another. Just this morning, I'm writing this on January 20th, I saw an Ani DeFranco post. It was about her album Up, 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 which I guess is celebrating its 25th anniversary, and someone commented that it was a shame she didn't speak up, up, up about what's happening in Palestine. Some other people agreed, while others came to Ani's defense. I myself am of the opinion that a famous person is not obligated to say anything about anything. Ani's just trying to promote a reissue. It has nothing to do with war. Not everything should. And what's ironic is that the comment in question caused a mini-war of sorts. People got nasty with their words. Violent, even. Can you see how tragic that is? How we fight about fighting, thereby perpetuating violence amongst ourselves, the very violence we claim to condemn. Rogers would say that it takes courage to communicate differently, to really listen to the other person without making evaluations based on our approval or disapproval of something they believe or think or feel. And as I've said before, social media is not the place where such listening can happen. Classrooms, on the other hand, absolutely. Family dinner tables, work meetings, UN conferences, yes, yes, yes. Rogers even mentions the United Nations or something similar in his book in the chapter titled Dealing with Breakdowns in Communication, Interpersonal and Intergroup, and in the following paragraph writes, "To be imaginative for a moment, let us suppose that a therapeutically oriented international group went to the Russian leaders and said, 'We want to achieve a genuine understanding of your views and, even more important, of your attitudes and feelings toward the United States. We will summarize and re-summarize these views and feelings, if necessary, until you agree that our description represents the situation as it seems to you.' Then suppose they did the same thing with the leaders in our own country. If they then gave the widest possible distribution to these two views, with the feelings clearly described but not expressed in name-calling, might not the effect be very great? It would not guarantee the type of understanding I have been describing, but it would make it much more possible. We can understand the feelings of a person who hates us much more readily when his attitudes are accurately described to us by a neutral third party than we can when he is shaking his fist at us." Perhaps it is scoff-worthy in its idealism. I don't think so, though. What we choose to do instead, destroy each other, deserves far worse than a scoff. Our behavior is insane. Rogers is just suggesting that we act with sanity instead. Or maybe intelligence is a better word. And he used the word imaginative to set up that last example. Which brings to mind creativity. Rogers asserts that creativity is an essential element, the essential element, in our figuring out how to be a part of mankind, how to share this planet without destroying it and each other. And the kind of creativity he's talking about requires the kind of communication he's talking about. Actually listening without instantly moving into evaluation and action. We cannot be rigid in our identifications if we are to find novel and adaptive ways forward that don't involve violence against ourselves and the planet from which we spring. By actually listening, we can tap into our collective intelligence, actually be informed by a variety of human experiences. I'm rambling, and I've once again been seduced by notions of how to make the world a better place, how entire nations should communicate with each other. What a joke. It'll never happen. But what can happen is that you individual person listening to me right now, can try to make more of your relationships helping ones. You can try to honor in everything you do your own process of becoming and the processes of others. Don't put yourself or anyone else in a box. Let your words and actions reflect how you're really feeling. And trust that when you do, it will have a ripple effect. Ani DeFranco says, I may not be able to change the whole fucking world, to which I'd add, nor should you try. Just focus on the change that you already are. Accept yourself just as you are, meaning don't resist your experience, whatever it may be on a moment-to-moment basis, and then you will change, and those around you will too. Or they won't. You can't really help what they're going to do. Some personalities are very strong, but you can bet that nothing in your life is going to change if you aren't being real. And even if people around you don't change, your perceptions of them will. All right, I'm going to stop there. Maybe next month I'll talk about the Suzuki Roshi book I mentioned last month about the Zen Buddhist poem, the Sandokai. I'm actually going to do another Buddhist retreat in early February at a nearby Zen center. It's even more specifically a sewing retreat. I'll be hand sewing my very own rakusu as part of my lay minister training. 5 days of pretty much nothing but sewing and meditating. I'll let you know how it goes. I'm Sarah B., and as always, I am grateful to you for listening to Time and Other Thieves.